maybe before I read, I can explain a bit about just the piece and how my piece came about. Was I read a blog called Notes from the Nog, and I started it when I lived up in Tottori Prefecture, so a couple of years before I came to Kyoto was when I started it. And where it was probably like a lot of people, it was just more about what was going on in my life, and it was a way really to resuscitate my writing practice, because I had let it go stale for a while. And but somewhere along the line, it started to turn into more of a walking and hiking and travel-based blog. I'm not sure quite how that happened, but once I moved to Kyoto, I was going out in the hills a lot, so it sort of followed me along as well. So I think for anyone, if anyone reads my blog, a lot of what I write, the pieces, in fact, I have a series piece that I started yesterday, which is a 5-parter about walking through Tohoku. And so a lot of my blog follows some of these long walks that I do, where I go out and walk 30 or 35 kilometers in a day, and I just write about things that I see. So I thought it would be sort of fun to flip that on its head. When Michael mentioned he wanted to do a book about walking, I thought it would be fun to do something completely opposite, where I literally walk about 150 meters, and that's about it. And I have a small child. I have a daughter who will be 3 in a few weeks, and so sometimes at the end of the day, I work at home, so at the end of the day, sometimes I want to go out and have a beer. And there's a place around the corner that does some nice craft beer, including the ones that I was drinking over there. And so at the end of the day, sometimes I go have a walk, I go grab a beer, my daughter would go with me, we go up and back, it'd be about 10 minutes. So the piece that I wrote was about walking up the street, literally just a couple blocks up and 1 block over. But some of you are obviously familiar with Werner Herzog, whose name I'm not pronouncing correctly, I'm sure. But he's a filmmaker. He makes both fiction and non-fiction films. But he's one of my favorite documentarians in particular, because in his documentaries, although they propose to be non-fiction, there's a bit of fiction in it. So even though I wrote in my piece that I was going to go 1 block or 2 blocks up, 1 block over in a single day, obviously that was probably 20 to 30 different times. And just as I'd go up and walk and get my beer, I was, as Michael was saying, I was keeping my mind open to sort of take in what I had. So it's interesting that Michael mentioned about reminding me to put the walk in there, because a lot of times I would go off, I'd come back and I'd make some notes. And then it was a matter of putting all of these different notes together in a piece, and I'd seem to forget the walking element of a lot of that. So when Michael edited my piece, I got a bit more of it into that. So, but the main impetus I have to say is by a writer called Nicholson Baker. Is anybody familiar with him? Is that American? You know, Sunboard? Okay, so I remember when I was in university, he wrote these books. The first was The Mezzanine, and the other one was called Room Temperature. And it was essentially the Mezzanine was about coming back from his lunch break at work, and just the 20 to 30 second ride on the escalator that he took. And this 30-second escalator ride, he expanded into 130, 150 pages. And I thought it was interesting because it literally was a mind walk, where he was just free associating with an idea. He'd start a new chapter with an idea, something he was doing, he was seeing, encountering in space, yet that would unravel into something and he'd be, way over here by the end of the chapter. So it was the same sort of idea, but I was making that more concise into paragraphs, and that's what I had in mind. So as Michael was saying, it was more meditative. That was what I envisioned, is that rather than just this dull walk through my neighborhood up to get a beer and back, it was more things I'm encountering on the landscape. How is that playing out into the bigger world, really? So that's that was my material, really. If you don't know Nicholson Baker, he's definitely worth reading. He's quite funny. So the piece I have is called Across Purple Fields, mainly because the neighborhood in which I live is called Murasaki no, which translates to purple fields, if you will. So I'll just read the first few pages, I think. Just sort of impromptu, because it's quite last minute. Few embody living with spirit like toddlers. They make their way through the world tentatively, each day bringing with it new experience and wonder. Every endeavor is full, unself-conscious, perfect. Watching my daughter as we get ready to go out, I once again feel more than a little envious of this. It helps me realize that I've been approaching Kyoto from the wrong perspective. When I first moved here after 12 years in a small rural Japan Sea coast city, I found Kyoto crowded, busy and filled with noise, a judgment made as I raced on my bicycle from one entertaining distraction to another. Yet recently, slowing down, I have begun to find the spaces in between. For as the Buddhists teach, it is in those spaces that Satori lives, just as it does in the spaces between the breaths. Perhaps I place too much emphasis on the subject, but it strikes me how little I hear Zen discussed today in relation to the city in which it flourished. When I came to Japan 20 years ago, it was hard to separate the two, for it was an interest in Zen and meditation that brought me here in the first place. Yet after a number of years of sitting and practicing some of its related art forms, it began to dawn on me that Zen was less about the materialistic packaging of culture and could instead be found in any act to which one brings complete awareness. As for my daughter, every act is performed in such a state. There is profundity in her putting on her jacket. The margins of her world are limitless, an idea reflected in her name Sora, which means sky, a nod to New Mexico, the place of her birth. But it can also be read as emptiness, in the Buddhist sense. Sora's world is measured not with the mathematical precision of adults, but measured by whatever she is engaged in. Like all adults, I'm afraid I'm guilty of wanting to escape the often pleasant immediate and move instead toward pleasurable yet contrived diversions. Sora is already standing at the entrance, shoes on, ready to make an escape of her own. And this house is conveniently located as with the idea of escape in mind. A 7-minute walk to the east and I'm on a subway, moving south toward other train lines that can take me to my beloved outdoors. I can claim that the walks to be had there are filled with spirit, but more often than not, I look at this as a respite from the mad pace of the city. An escape indoors is also close by. A 7-minute walk to the west brings me to a Zen temple that offers meditation nearly every morning. And on many a morning I can be found atop one of the round cushions placed at odds to the room's squared corners. A poet who greatly inspires me, used to meditate here a number of decades ago. I like to think that he and I have collaborated on the sheen of the temple floor, brought to a high polish by the focused sliding of feet and walking meditation. These days I find more meditation in my walks with Sora. I follow her lead, being ever the student. Unlike the timed sessions at the temple, our walks are timeless. It is impossible to predict how long they will take, or what the world will offer up, but always the route is the same. 2 blocks over, 1 block up, 1 block up. Let's stop there. Should I get into the walk itself?
Well, you're going to look up at the sky at any point?
I'm going to look up the sky.
Yeah, I like that bit.
The sky. Okay.
Is that too far in?
No, that's pretty close. Michael liked that line. Okay. I step from my front door and look immediately upward. Living as I do in a traditional machiya, the view of the sky is limited to a single window, and I actually have to go outdoors to see what the weather is doing. Often I'll have some idea due to the weather within the house. Property tax in Kyoto was once measured in the width of a structure, so machi were built long and thin and are affectionately referred to as eel's dens. My own house is 6 small rooms laid end to end, the windowless inner rooms holding the winter's cold a little too effectively. Now as I look upward, I think yet again that the one thing I most dislike about Kyoto is that even out in the streets you can't really see the sky. The roads are narrow, above which tall buildings are bound by tangled power lines. So it's a good thing that Kyoto has plenty of ground level to delight the eyes.
Okay.
Yeah?
Great.
All right.
Thank you.